Welcome to Wadsworth History on Film, a program presented by the Wadsworth Area Historical Society and designed to record the oral history for posterity. I'm Caesar Carino, your host, and we have two special guests today. Both have been on before, but I've asked them to come again because of a special reason, and we'll discover what that special reason is in a minute. Karl Harter, who is a nonagenarian. Karl, you're going to have to tell us how many of those nines do you have? 90, how many? Age, 90?
Oh, beyond 90.
Yes.
92.
And Dr. John McAnalis, who was Karl Harter's student. And this is a few years ago, and we're going to get to you in a couple of minutes too, Dr. McAnalis, so that you can share with the audience a little bit about your life. Both of them have been on before, as I said, but the reason we have them on today is that there's a whole history that Karl Harter has in his own right that really needs to be identified. Karl is a native Wadsworthite, as a matter of fact, what, 2 or 3 generations back, aren't you?
A few.
A few. Going back to about 15, 20, something like that?
Now, what do you mean?
Your generations go back that far, don't they?
Mine?
Yes.
You mean in this country?
Yes.
They came to this country in 1832.
1832.
From southwest Germany.
From southwest Germany. And they settled right here in Wadsworth, did they?
In the Wadsworth area.
Wadsworth area.
Yeah.
East of Wadsworth, which is probably now Western Star, right?
It was almost Western Star. The old farm is still out there, but it's all automobiles now.
All automobiles. Probably more productive money-wise than the farm was.
Probably so.
Right, and your career was in teaching.
Right.
And we want to hear how you got to that career and then where you did your teaching, and particularly some people who might have motivated you to become a teacher. Now, what you did not say about yourself the last time, and what we're going to get Dr. McAnalis to say this time, or to help us to say, is what kind of a teacher you were and what kind of successes that you had. You were a very, very modest man. Everyone knows that of you. So we'll have him help us with that when we get to him. Tell us a little bit more about your boyhood days in Wadsworth, and then how you got to Heidelberg finally as a student, and then finally into teaching.
Well, my Wadsworth days started with my walking to school from the first grade right on through, from the farm out there on the south side of the road, built of handmade brick. The brick were made from clay that was dug out by hand on the old Mills farm. Which is
across the road from where you were.
That's right.
The Mills farm is at the corner of Mill Road and Broad Street.
Yes.
And it's still standing, or it was at this time, in 1999, it's still standing, a huge farm there. Elton Mills was the...
That's right.
Elton Mills.
That's right, and his Elton Mills' father and mother lived on one side of the house, and Elton and their family lived on the west side of the house.
The west side of the house, right.
Yeah, that was a few years ago.
Well, I guess it was.
I was born there in 1906 and lived there till I was a sophomore in high school, and we moved into town. And that was the home of the family for quite a few years. And finally, I moved on to Heidelberg through Irma Swigert.
Irma Swigert. We've had that name on the program many times.
That's right.
Tell us a little bit about Irma Swigert and how she provoked you to go to Heidelberg.
Well, while she was here teaching, a group of, I think it was 8 of us students from Wadsworth High School spent a weekend in Tiffin visiting Heidelberg. Mm-hmm. And that was my first experience with Heidelberg.
And then you went there.
And then I went there, and 3 others started there with me, and I was one one of those three, and there were, let's see, two of us went on to Heidelberg, and both of us graduated there.
And you graduated in what area? What was your major?
Well, I had a major in, excuse me, in social studies, and a major in history, and a minor. What the deuce was my minor in? It was more or less related to the
Language, perhaps?
It was not a language. I did not take any
Government, civics?
Well, it was involved in government and civics. I took no courses that prepared me for what I eventually did. I took courses that I wanted to take when I was at Heidelberg. And then when I graduated from Heidelberg, I started in taking the courses I needed to teach after I'd graduated from Heidelberg.
And where did you take those?
I started at Akron U and at Kent, and then from there to Ohio State, and at Ohio State I finished my master's degree with quite a few hours beyond the master's degree.
You would have had to get the certification for teaching,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Now, one of your students over there was Dr. John McAnalis, is that correct?
Right.
In Barberton. Everyone for the past 35 years has known of him as being an upstanding physician, an outstanding community leader, a brilliant surgeon, and so forth. We would like to hear just one wee little thing that he did in high school that was kind of bad. We'd like to hear about that. Can you remember anything at all that he did?
Those little quirks I've never tried to remember.
No, that was a good way of getting out of it. Now, Dr. McAnalis, how is your relationship different with Karl here as compared with just any student? I mean, you seem to have a great deal of admiration and respect and regard and knowledge about Karl Harter.
Well, yes, I do. I know Karl especially because my father was also a teacher
right.
at Barberton High School.
And what kind of teacher?
Well, my father was James Sleeth McAnalis, and he taught mathematics. And he was, before Karl was athletic director, he was the faculty manager of the athletics. Later,
Your father was?
Yes, he was. And then later the business manager for the school.
And he was a teacher.
Yes.
So you had then a relationship there which was collegial as well as student. And did you ever take a class from?
Oh, yes,
Karl?
I did.
And what kind of?
I had civics, like many other hundreds of Barberton High School students.
And I understand that, Karl, that you were a pretty rough taskmaster as a civics teacher. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know what you mean by taskmaster.
Well, you demanded a great deal of those students, did you not?
Well, I don't think it was a serious demand. We had a schedule. Everybody was involved in the schedule. I tried to get each kid going through civics classes to get some experience in leading discussions of students. That I felt was one thing that was generally lacking in my education and in many kids' education going through school. They got no experience or very little experience with helping youngsters get ready to lead discussions in groups. And that was one of the things that I felt they should get out of this civics experience.
Would you agree that he was just a common, ordinary, run-of-the-mill civics teacher?
No, but I think that he did exactly as he said. Mm-hmm. And as we know, coaching was a large part of Karl's life, but that was an extension of teaching, and he brought that same kind of discipline and drive and initiative into the coaching that he expressed in the teaching.
Now, how did you become involved with coaching, Karl?
Well, I played basketball until I got one knee injured, and could no longer play. That was my junior year.
Junior in high school.
Yes.
Who were some of the people with whom you played?
No, that was junior in college.
Oh, junior in college, I see. All right.
And football, 116, 17 pounds wasn't quite enough.
116 or 17?
That's about.
I weighed that in the first grade, I think.
No, they.
Have you always been of slight frame?
Yes, yes.
That's
No,
a real blessing, incidentally. I hope that you understand that, you know.
I didn't get to 120 pounds until late in my senior year in college.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And you did not play any other athletics or any other sports?
Well, I started the tennis program
And where was that tennis program?
down at the stadium.
In Akron, in Barberton.
Down at the stadium
In Barberton.
in Barberton,
Right.
yeah.
Well, weren't you involved with tennis here in Wadsworth as well?
Oh, I helped to get the tennis program going in the summer after school was out.
And where was that?
Down at up at the Highlands,
Durning
Sterling Park.
Park.
We started out with 2 clay tennis courts there, and eventually had 4 blacktop courts. And well, that program, I have 30, 40, 50 kids in the summer after school was out.
Do you remember some of the early people that you had in the program?
Oh, that's you don't know where to quit remembering.
No. Can you remember anybody you had in the program?
Well, we had some good tennis players there. They started in the program in the summer and then played high school tennis. But the big part of that program was the summer program. When you could get, as soon as school was out, I'd start free tennis lessons, and they lasted usually for 6 to 8 weeks. Had the same group of kids.
You did this all for free.
That's right.
No money whatsoever. That's wonderful. We don't have that much devotion to helping kids today. What year did you start doing that, Karl? Do you remember?
Well, it would have been, 24, 28. It would have been somewhere between 29 and 30.
Almost 70 years ago.
Yeah.
And do you ever see any of those people walking on the streets now who were playing? Who are some of the people you can
Well,
remember?
I see them, they say hi, and they mention the fact that they had taken tennis lessons, and that's it. I don't remember many of the names.
I'll bet dollars to donuts, but when this program is aired, I'll receive all kinds of telephone calls and letters. Every night I get phone calls from people who call to say, I did this, or I remember he did this, or whatever. So some of those people will call, and then we'll write their names down, and then we will affix that then to this program.
Okay.
So that we will know who they are. Now, in teaching tennis, I mean, you teach them the fancy stuff? Do you teach them the...
Well, you can't teach the fancy stuff to the beginner.
No. No, you can't teach
And
them.
that's what most of these kids were. Most of them were beginners. And as I say, in the summer, I'd have 35, 40, sometimes 50 kids.
Now, what about Dr. McAnalis? Was he one of your tennis stars as well?
Well, he was a good tennis player,
Did you teach him?
but his wife was much better.
Ah, let's hear about this. I want to hear something where he can be outshone.
Well, having the kids show up there for the summer program, you had all kinds of abilities. But it was interesting the way some of them stayed with it. And this last year, 2 different occasions, I had groups of kids, not for tennis, but they would mention the fact that they had been in these tennis lesson programs, 30, 40 years ago.
Now, who was Dr. McAnalis' wife? Do you remember her?
Yes.
Well, who was she?
She was the last name I can't remember. I've been trying to...
Leisure, Joan Leisure.
Leisure, sure.
Yes. And she was a good tennis player.
She became a good one, yeah.
and you taught her as well.
Yeah.
And were they together, or is one older than the other?
They're about the same age. John's a little bit older. I forget how many years, John.
Just a year, but Joan came through the summer program over in Barberton.
Yeah.
Karl also was the director of the programs in the parks over in Barberton.
And you had not told us about the fact that you were director of parks in Barberton?
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Now, what did you do as a director of parks?
Well, I organized the programs that we had, the instruction programs. The main one was tennis, to get tennis started over there, because they had no tennis program at all when I started over there.
Where did you learn to play tennis?
Well, right over there.
Right over there.
Right over there on the south side of College Street, right at the corner of what's the side street?
Pardee.
Pardee.
Pardee, yeah.
Oh, where the gas, or rather, well, it used to be the gas company, but where that building is.
That's right.
There was a tennis court there, wasn't there?
There was a tennis court there, the old P.D. Pardee tennis court.
That's right, P.D. Pardee, right. Mm-hmm.
P.T.
Right. His great-granddaughter is a good friend of mine, Caroline Pardee. She was at the university with me.
Oh, I see.
She is now 80, she'll kill me, she'll be 89 years old this May.
Yeah.
Great-granddaughter of P.T. Pardee's. And how about describing that tennis court a little bit? It certainly was not what you saw at Sterling Park, though, was it?
Well, I got acquainted with that park from the farm. We had 2 Jersey cows, which were mine to milk. I brought the milk in, my mother took care of it. She churned the butter, and I delivered the butter to people in town. And I thought, as I came past this tennis court here, I'd like to learn to play that. So I checked with a fellow up at the north end who had played tennis.
You remember who that was?
It was, oh shoot.
Well, if it comes to you.
I'll get it if it pops out. But he was no longer playing tennis, and I bought his old tennis racket. I put it on my wagon as I pulled the butter out to the west side of town to deliver. And I had my tennis racket on there, and I would stop on the way back into town with my tennis racket laying on the wagon, walk in and stop there by the tennis courts. And Bill Kane was playing tennis then.
Now, this is old Bill or his son?
Old Bill.
Mm-hmm.
Old
The
Bill.
one who's gone now.
That's right. And we would say hello to each other. He was the same age as my sister. They graduated from high school together. And Bill was a pretty good tennis player. And one day he said, "Karl, come on out here." And he had just finished playing a set of tennis. I forget, I think it was with George Huntsberger. And we talked a little bit, and he said, "Bring your racket out here." So that's where I started playing tennis, with Bill as my instructor.
Bill Kane is your instructor. Tell us who Bill Kane was in town.
Well, as I say, he graduated with my sister from high school, and a good friend of theirs went with Bill to Western Reserve University. They came back to Wadsworth, opened a law office, and Bill quit at the end of the first year, but his partner continued the law practice.
Do you remember his partner's name?
It was, he ended up with Ohio Farmers, head of their life insurance division. But Bill dropped at the end of the first year. He quit that practice and went on from there just individually working with young people. And he ended up he was somewhere around late 20s. And they moved from Wadsworth over to Leroy.
Leroy. Mm-hmm.
And he spent the rest of his time in this area, in Leroy. Then the family moved to California. And the interesting thing to me was the fact that his parents both passed away, and he ended up out there with his family. And when he passed away, this is now some 40 years after he had left Wadsworth, the body was brought back to Wadsworth for burial, which surprised me. And he had 2 daughters and a son. And I saw them at the funeral, and I went to the cemetery. And afterward, we all talked, and they came to the house, and we spent the afternoon. His 2 daughters and his son. They were a nice family.
This is excuse me. This is probably about 40 years ago.
I would guess more than that.
You think more than that?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay, 40. I thought that Bill was brought back to Wadsworth in the 50s. Late
Well,
50s.
That's probably pretty close to
Yeah.
right. I'm 92, and he. Yeah, that's about right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then you had mentioned that he came up to your house with the 2 sisters. Who are the 2 sisters, Bill Kane's 2 sisters?
Who are they?
Yes.
I don't remember their names.
Don't remember the names. They aren't around here anymore, though.
They've been in California all this time.
All the time. They never were around here. I just want to establish the fact
They were
that
very young before when they moved to California. The children were very young. all
very young,
3 of them.
yes. As a matter of fact, Bill Jr. was quite young, too.
That's
When
right.
he came back. But I just wanted to establish the fact that they do not live here in Wadsworth right at the present time.
No, they haven't for good
We
reason.
mentioned, excuse me, a little while ago about his working with the programs there in Barberton in the Parks program. Did you notice how circuitously he worked around that and got off onto something else? Now, how about filling in some of those blanks that he left out, too humble to leave out? What were some of the other great things that he did in Barberton with respect to the parks, and particularly as it relates to people who could not afford it?
Well, of course, the parks were always open to everybody, and I think that there was a great service rendered there in providing those programs and encouraging youngsters to learn. But Karl Harter has always been good on basics. He taught basics in teaching, he taught basics in coaching. And you came from Heidelberg to Barberton in 1928
Right.
to teach.
Right.
And the teaching didn't start off with civics. What courses were you assigned to teach?
Well,
New kid on the block.
I had a foreign language course, and I had a physics course, and a math course, and 2 different history courses, my first year of teaching.
5 preparations, 3 different courses. Wow.
And then it took quite a while to evolve into the civics.
That's right.
But you also got involved in coaching at Barberton early on. Do you remember who the football coach was at Barberton when you started there?
The football coach when I started was a fellow from Ohio Wesleyan.
Stanley Pratt?
It was Stanley Pratt,
Yes.
and they thought he was going to have a great ball team there, and I was his assistant. And we won the first game against Worcester, I think, by 5 touchdowns. And from then on, we never had the regular backfield all together for a ball game. Not one Saturday. We played up practically all Saturday games.
Had to, because no lights.
That's right. And we had a ball team that played pretty good ball, but if you had 4 backs, that was a ball team. Well, we had 4 pretty good backs, and the first game we had all 4 of them, and from then on we never had the 4 backs together.
Why was that?
Injuries.
Oh, I see.
Injuries. No, George Huntsberger was one of them. Trying to think of the one. Oh, Mike Raplenovic was the right halfback, and Marsh Romaine was the quarterback. And who was the fourth one?
Were you, Karl, were you the only assistant coach at the time?
Yes, when I started, yeah.
And then,
Each year we added one more.
but as you became more involved with the coaching and became the head coach at Barberton, you developed a system of coaching.
Right, that's right.
Spreading responsibilities
That's
so
right.
that each could teach basics to the
That's right.
youngsters.
Where did you start them, Karl? And not in high school, obviously, did you?
Pardon?
Where did you start teaching the basics? Not in high school, obviously.
Well, I tried to get started in the 7th and 8th grade.
Aha.
Tried to get started in the 7th and 8th.
And that's when, at that time, you had only about 3 or 4 schools, didn't you? You had,
Well, we had 3 junior highs. We had Highland, Portage, and UL Light.
well, UL Light wasn't there when you first started, though, was
Not
it?
the first year,
No.
no. That was about 3 years later
Yeah.
that UL Light got started.
And UL Light was the principal, the superintendent, wasn't he?
That's right, yeah.
Who was the superintendent when you first got there?
The superintendent of schools,
Yes,
You mean in 1928?
28.
yeah.
But that was still Mr. Light.
Oh, still Mr. Light then?
Yeah, 28 was still UL Light.
And who about before that?
Well, he was the only one, the only superintendent I taught with.
Oh, I see. Mhm. There was a Cruson that was there too, was there not?
Well, he came later. He was a teacher in Massillon and came up here as an assistant, and then as he became the head of the schools in Barberton.
And then he went to become the head of the schools in the state of New York.
He did, and he tried to get me to go out there, and I went out one summer to visit to see what the situation was, and I said, no, thank you.
Well, Karl, in your development of team coaching in football and in basketball too, in those early days in the 30s, you were playing some pretty big names, weren't you? You played Massillon on occasion?
We played Massillon regularly.
Yes. Who was the coach down there at the time?
Paul Brown.
Paul Brown was the coach.
You
And-
played against Paul Brown, right?
The thing I'll never forget about him, we played both football and basketball, and he was head coach in both, and I was head coach here. And we played him in our gym, and we beat them in the last 3-4 minutes. And when we were all finished, he congratulated, but damn it, don't expect to play me again.
Well,
I said, why not? He said, in this damn little coop you've got here for a gym? I said, Paul, I'll make a little bet with you that this gym is longer and wider than the one you've got down there in that little cubby hole of a gym of yours. That's 3 feet below the level of the floor around it. What? You go down and measure it and give me a call this week. He called me and said, damn it, you're right.
But Karl, you took Paul Brown on outside the school in a game of tennis, did you not? One game you played with Paul Brown.
One meeting.
Okay,
We played 3 sets.
And who won?
He didn't.
And you never played him again, right?
He didn't win. I think that's priceless. Now, did you and Paul Brown become friends then?
Oh, yes. I had known him for quite a few years.
Oh, before he was the coach at Massillon.
Yeah.
Then when he finally became, well, a professional, I guess, you want to call it that. I guess he's always
Well-
professional, but
He had an unusual situation. He never was any place where he didn't have the advantage over the opposition. He started in Massillon at a time when they were taking in the kids all around the area to meet the competition and to defeat the competition. And that evolved over a period of years. And he ended up taking the Ohio State freshman group, and from there he moved up into, well, he first took a job in Michigan. Then he got to the University of Michigan, and he had, again, this was in wartime. It was in a time when everything was completely different than now. After that period was over and the war was gone and things settled down to normal, it became just a normal, good high school program, which included kids some from other areas right around the town, but it wasn't quite what it was when he started there. But we played them regularly, and I'm trying to think of the name of another fellow who coached there. He coached for 3 years while I was coaching, and was a good coach, and had good ball teams. But the interesting period was that period of time when it wasn't a normal group of Massillon High School kids. It was kids that were going to Massillon to school because of the war situation. Mm-hmm. And that was quite a different situation.
It was, a lot of things were different during the war. The whole country was turned on its end.
Oh, yes.
During the war. Karl, we want to get back to this part of the program. That is, your athletic program. A couple of things here that we probably ought to mention on a personal basis, and we had talked about this once before. How about telling us a little bit about Betty, your wife?
Billy,
I'm sorry, Billy, your wife.
Well, she had been teaching in her hometown of Fitzgerald, Georgia, and then came to Atlanta and taught in Atlanta for several years. And then an opening appeared here in Barberton, and ULI Junior High had just been opened, and that created some jobs, and she came up here and took one of those jobs. And the deuce wasn't, it was Paul Brown, we were playing him. And we played them in basketball in the old gym in Barberton.
Which is across the street from the high school.
That's right. And when we got through playing, Paul congratulated me, shook my hand, but he said, "Don't ever expect me to come back to this damn hole in the wall, on the floor."
No, we can't do that. We can't do that. Now, how did you meet Billy?
Well, a fellow who had started teaching in Wadsworth, he and I had become quite good friends.
Remember his name?
It was, oh shoot, I'll think of it.
Yeah, when it comes to you.
But we had gotten together on a couple little trips, and he had a girlfriend down in Tennessee, and at the end of a school year, we took a trip down there so he could visit with her a bit, and then we went on farther south. Came back, and the next year we got together again, and we ended up on a trip together. And he was insisting, this other fellow was insisting, that we had a bigger high school and a lousy gym to play in. And I made a little bet with him one time, and late in the year, about the fact that our gym was bigger than the one in Massillon. Mm-hmm. I said, "I'll make a little bet with you that it's longer and wider than your gym floor in Massillon." And he wouldn't believe it.
But you won the bet.
I won the bet.
That's a good one.
Karl, could we go back a bit to your developing of the team coaching, and particularly during the war in Barberton, and the advent of the new superintendent, Walter Cruson, and you had an athletic program that was just about to explode into winning a lot of games. And you had developed things to the point that you were willing to turn over the coaching of the football and the basketball,
And
too.
basketball, yeah.
And can you tell us what happened at that point?
Well, Raber came in as a basketball coach, and I'm
Can we
trying.
have Raber's first name?
Leroy,
Leroy Raber.
and I'm trying to think.
Harry Strobel.
Harry Strobel came in, the ball team that I'd worked with for 4 years, and they were a good bunch of kids. That was the good basketball team and football team. And I'd worked with them for 4 years. They got to be juniors and seniors. And when we brought Raber in to take the basketball program, I said, we need to get somebody in here to take the football program, and we brought Strobel in, and who was a good coach. But some of this stuff doesn't go into the newspaper, I hope.
Oh, no.
But he was a good coach, but had no interest in developing for 2 years and 3 years and 4 years ahead
Just for the game.
for the next season. And he did a good job with them. That bunch of kids that won the state championship, they were a better ball team the year before they won the state championship, but they had 2 bad injuries, which kept them from doing quite what they should have been able to do that year.
So Harry Strobel won the state championship. And who were our big guns at that time in the backfield? Dick Gowdy and Paul Gonder.
Gowdy and Gonder, but I'm trying to think of the fullback. Who,
Sellers.
well, Sellers played with them their first year. But there was another guy who was a better football player, but as a student, he didn't give a darn.
Didn't care about that part of it. Did your team ever play Wadsworth when you were coach?
Oh, yes.
Who was the coach here at the time? In Wadsworth.
At Wadsworth,
Who was the
Art Wright.
Art Wright? And you and he were friends.
Yes,
Tell us what kind of an opponent he was.
well, he was a pretty loose-mouthed guy. He wanted to come to Harvard and to coach. He passed the word to somebody to pass the word to me. I would never have wanted him on my staff.
I see.
He's a nice guy, a
Oh, yeah.
good friend, but his language was too much for me. Art Wright. No, we lived side by side there on Lyman Street for a couple of years.
Caesar, I'd like to interject if I could.
Sure, please do.
About Karl's coaching abilities and the basics that he taught and the esteem with which he was held. We mentioned Gowdy and Gonder, who were the big G's at Barberton, and I took care of both of those fellows as patients years later. And Paul Gonder was in my office one time, and I said, you always talk athletics with these people. And I said, who was your best coach in school? Knowing that it was Strobel that had won the championship with these kids. And he said it was Coach Harter for
See there?
basics.
So those are the things you won't tell me. That's why we had Dr. McAnalis come in.
Well,
And I heard the same thing in basketball when you turned your basketball team over to Spitz Raber, and you won, I believe, a sectional up at Goodyear Gym in Akron, and in the locker room, why, he said it was your team.
well, both of those guys were good coaches, but Raber did a better job of preparing for 2 years and 3 years and 4 years out than Strobel. Harry, he could do a great job with good ball players.
That's not what teaching's all about.
Yeah. You've got to get them there.
That's right.
Now, in your time in the coaching in the 40s and then in the 50s and 60s, there were a couple of fellows who went on to make their names in coaching in the country, on the national scene.
Oh, yeah.
And one of them was a Barberton boy from Oakdale, who was Bo Schembechler.
Bo Schembechler, yeah.
Bo Schembechler
Yeah.
is one of yours.
But his, basically, Bo was, he was a rough individual and a rough speaker, but he did a great job at Michigan. But when he quit coaching there, he turned the coaching over to somebody else. And 2 years later, he got disgusted with what wasn't happening with that bunch of kids. Came back in, but he could never get it going back the way it had been.
One of your former students became the president of Texas A&M.
He had a brother who was a good athlete too.
And tell us who that boy was.
Well, I'm trying to think of the name. Those two kids, I don't know why I can't remember their names.
This is John Makovic?
Yeah.
Yes.
But John went on to Texas, and John was too nice a guy to handle some of the rough problems. He always had a little paper note pad with him, always carried it in his pocket, and always take down notes during the ball game. Well, he got into Texas a year or two too soon. But they did a good job his first year. They beat Nebraska, which was the only loss Nebraska had. And then he ran into a year of trouble. He beat Worcester the first ball game, and everybody thought he's going to be undefeated, because they beat Worcester quite handily. I think it was 5-6 touchdowns. But
well, John Makovic also was the coach of the professional Kansas City Chiefs.
that's right. Yeah. No, John was a good coach, and you know, I've tried to get in touch with him the last 3 years. He's still on the campus down there in Texas.
He is in his 50s now, isn't he?
Yeah.
He remembers you very fondly. I ran into him not too long ago.
Did you?
And when I was at the university, we had a convocation of various presidents and so forth, and he happened to be in the audience. And some mention was made about the fact that I was one of the local ones and everyone else was from out of town and so forth. Where is he from? Wadsworth. I'm from Barberton. We started talking, and he mentioned, you know, your influence on him too. So you have a lot of people whom you've influenced, and I think that it's good for us to know who those people are, because your quiet life here in Wadsworth has always been somewhat somewhat belied the fact that you have been extremely powerful in the influence of young people, and we're going to try to get that out of you today, and Dr. McAnalis is going to help us.
Well, you can't coach that have the jobs I had without having influence.
Oh, yes, you can. You can have a negative influence. And I can name some names and addresses, and so can you, but the good influences.
Yeah.
Could we go back to the parks program? How many parks did Barberton have at that time, and what did you do in terms of building the numbers of parks that they had?
Well, when I started in Barberton, we had Tuscarora Park.
Which is on the east side.
On the east side. And we had a small park up at the north end, and we had a pretty good sized park out on the west side, but it wasn't developed. The land was there, the area was there, but it had not been really developed and made into a facility that had real influence.
Mm-hmm.
but we had pretty good programs there.
How did you influence the development of that park?
Well, we just, I would go to the Board of Education and get a small grant of money to have, and then we had an unusual guy as a parks superintendent, so to speak, who was really a shovel man primarily, but did a great job.
You remember his name?
Yes, it's, I know his name as well as my own.
Well, when it pops into your mind, just blurt it out. Then what kinds of programs, you said you started the tennis program in the parks as well, but what other kinds of programs did you start? What about the handicapped?
Well, I'll skip to answer your first question first. We did not have any kind of a program that was really teaching basic fundamentals to get a good softball program going, or to get a good tennis program going, or to get even a golf program going. We had to do those things from scratch. And I think there's where we did the most development in things like that.
In other words, you weren't thinking of this season, next season, or the next season. You were thinking of this season, this season, this season, next season, next season,
That's right.
for years and years and years, and that's what you had to do,
That's
starting them early. Did you have any influence on the handicap program of Barberton?
Very little.
Very little?
We had no program for them. We were just getting the basic program started. But eventually, we did get that as a part of the whole park.
That's right,
program.
exactly. And who really can take the credit for that?
Well, it had to be when I was working with the program, getting it started. But the fellows who helped me, there were two of them, and that goes back quite a few years. I remember I can see some of those guys just as plain as you sitting right there. But the names are gone.
I understand that one very well. The only one young enough around here to remember would be Dr. McAnalis, because he's not very old. Do you remember those names?
No, I don't. I know that Sam Macy took over the program after Karl retired as athletic director. And
Yeah, Sam is a whale of a nice guy.
Sam passed on, didn't he, quite suddenly?
Yes. Yeah, and he did a good job with those programs. Just trying to think of the name of his son.
Chuck.
Chuck, yes, Chuck Macy.
His wife is a teacher too.
Yes, she taught in Medina.
Taught in Norton.
Pardon?
She taught in Norton, didn't she?
I don't think. I think in
I don't-
Medina.
I
Did
don't
she
think
teach in Medina?
Yeah.
I thought
I
she
don't
taught in
think she
Norton.
ever taught
Her
in
name was
Norton.
Harriet.
I thought well, I can be wrong. I've been wrong before.
She started in a little town farther south in Ohio.
Tell us some of the kinds of things that teacher education was all about 70 years ago. We know what it's like today, and we realize fully well that there are a lot of things that have changed. You took all of the courses that you liked at Heidelberg, then you went to Akron, Kent, and Ohio State to take courses for preparation for
Yeah.
your certification. What was necessary for certification at that time, and what one thing, and I'll help you out a little bit on this one, what one thing that did you have to attest to before you were certified concerning your morals and your ethical behavior?
That I had to attest to.
Before you can get a certificate in those days.
I think that it was all by word of mouth.
Well, someone had to attest to your honesty, your integrity, and your ethical character. They're no longer allowed to do that. But when you were going through school, when I went through school, we had to get someone to attest to that. I mean, that's actually said on your certificate that you're a good person of moral character and so forth, and you attest to this. And the superintendent or someone had to do that. No, now they no longer do that. What were some of the courses that you had? What were some of the areas that you had to take before you could become a teacher?
Well, you had general courses of
Methods?
methods. After you decided what you wanted to try to teach, you made those decisions. But as far as fitting in and taking the responsibility on a faculty, you never had to, well, I don't know what term to use, you never had to promise to do it this way or that way. It was just assumed that in your general training and the experience you had shown as far as the responsibilities of the job, they were there. And I think it was less formal then than it is now.
Much less formal, but there was a basic structure, which I think everyone understood. And parents as well as teachers and administrators, and now that's been changed a lot. Dr. McAnalis, what are some of the outstanding things as a student do you remember about Karl Harter? Some of the things that you mentioned a little while ago, the fact that he was, we'll use the word tough taskmaster, even though you don't like that term as a civics teacher, but what were some of the comments the students made about this man?
Well, Karl was he was a difficult teacher to satisfy, I would say. He demanded that you learn appropriately, learn basics, and that you had a real appreciation for, especially in civics, of your government and your surroundings. But I wrote down a quote here that Bo Schembechler made when Karl retired, and he said that Karl was a man of principle, gentleman, dedicated teacher, tough but fair and loyal. And that wasn't just the coaching. That was in the classroom too. And I remember the way that Karl would call you up to his desk, and he would have his grade book up there, and he would have a sheet above and a sheet below your name, and your name was right in the line, and then there would be these test results across the book. And whatever ended up at the end, he let you know what it was going to be, but you had to earn it all the way across. And there were many teachers that would allow permissiveness in terms of grades, get a little higher grade for just because you were a good guy or nice lady or what have you. But Karl was not one of those. You earned it, and it was really a lifetime value that he instilled in you. It was a way of doing things.
Whatever you earned, you got. And that was a wonderful thing to do.
Well, teaching is an interesting experience.
Oh, indeed it is. How many years did you teach altogether?
37.
37 years. And what year did you retire?
65.
And when you did retire, who was the superintendent? Milan Pavko?
I don't think so. I don't remember who it was.
I don't remember who was superintendent either. It was well after Mr. Ely.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, Ely was a good person.
What about Mr. Pfeiffer? Could have been he? Or was he the principal?
He was the principal. Mm-hmm. No, Pfeiffer was a taskmaster.
Mm-hmm.
As far as educational philosophy, not too much.
Not too much, huh?
But he was a disciplinarian and ran the show the way he thought it ought to be run. But as far as philosophy of education, not much.
Not too much.
No.
Mm-hmm. So you don't think it was Milan Pavko when you retired then?
Pardon?
You don't think that Milan Pavko was the superintendent when you retired?
I don't think so. I could be wrong. I don't believe it.
And Queen was what, superintendent, was the principal too?
Principal. He tried superintendency for 1 year.
But it couldn't have been Queen then when you
No.
retired. And his wife is in our historical society.
Yeah,
A lovely, Mary,
She is
Mary,
a
just a
nice
sweetheart of a person.
I see her almost every day out there where I am.
Yes.
She's a nice gal.
Yeah, she's a great person.
Yeah.
The one thing that we haven't talked about is, and we promised that we were going to bring, how about telling us some of the things about this young man that came up through the ranks? I mean, was he an apt student? Was he a good person? Was he a good student in civics? Was he a studious individual? What do you know about him?
Well, John was quiet,
John is quiet, okay.
but he had a direction he wanted to go, and he was going there. You could see that. The thing that surprised many people was the way he suddenly becomes the student that he became in medicine. That was kind of a surprise to a lot of people, wasn't it, John?
Well, if you say so, Karl. I was pleased to be there, and I was pleased to, for instance, you were the first patient in Wadsworth that I operated on, and it was at the old hospital, and I was very pleased and honored that you asked me to help you
Must
out.
have done a good job. He's lived 93 years. That was about 30 years ago or better?
No, well, it was 1970,
1970.
69 or 70.
Yeah.
Yeah,
29
yeah.
years, yeah.
In spite of the shortcomings of the old hospital.
And you're still living, you're in good
Well,
shape.
It wasn't a very serious surgery.
Did you have, in your own mind, did you have any thought that one day that the two of you would be paired up again? I mean, you've known him since a little boy, is that right?
Yeah.
Matter of fact, were you even born when, you weren't even born at the time,
What on?
when you first started teaching?
Oh, no.
No, he wasn't even born. So do you remember his being born?
Yes.
You remember his being born? Then did you think that when he was this little toddling child that he would be performing surgery on you?
I wasn't thinking any such things.
No, but you finally did. Karl, we're almost at the end of our hour here, and I wanted to bring up three little things here, if I may, please. First and foremost, what is your fondest memory of teaching? I know that winning football games and things like this, but with kids. But do you have anything which stands out? I'll give you a clue. One of the fondest memories of my teaching was that one day when I first walked into a school, a little third grade girl came up to me. I had not known one soul there. She came up, she gave me a great big hug, and she said, "I don't know who you are," but and she gave me her name, and I remembered. I won't say it here. She gave me her name, and she said, "I'll always remember you." And she walked away. And, but that's that was one of those things. Do you remember anything like that?
Well, similar things occur when I go to meetings and I see people with a boy or a girl who I had in class way back when.
Well, 70 years now almost.
Yeah. And I haven't seen them for a long time. And they come up and introduce themselves and say, so-and-so, and mention a class or two, and just to pull out memories of teaching, of having had experience with me as a teacher. Those are the things that I recall.
The second thing that I want to ask you, and we're running out of time fast here, the second thing I want to ask you is, after you retired, did your mind ever stop teaching?
Well, your mind never stops doing the things that you feel need to be done. You know what should be done, you know how it can be done, and you think of what can I do to get there.
The last question. What is the greatest thing about athletics in your mind?
Well, the greatest thing about athletics is how much you can accomplish compared to how much you have accomplished compared to what you could accomplish. As you're in that situation being tested all the time. And how much of it have you really accomplished that you could have accomplished?
Is there anything else?
I don't think of anything.
How about you, Dr. McAnalis? What do you think?
Well, I asked Karl that question before, and Karl facetiously said it was winning, but Karl Harter is how you play the game.
How you play the game.
And we're all winners because of how Karl taught us to play the game.
That's right, and blessings upon you for that. A legacy starting 70 years ago in teaching, 93 years ago or 92 years plus in life. And you've given us that pleasure, Karl, and we are grateful to you. We're grateful to you for having helped to produce people like Dr. John McAnalis and like Bo Schembeckler and other people.
There are two opposites.
There are two opposites, but they're both great.
That's
and
right.
Thank you very much. Our time is finished, and thanks again, Karl, for joining us, and for you, Dr.
You're
McAnalis.
surely welcome.